The boy stood in the rain with a cardboard sign that read, "Buy my bike." His fingers gripped the rusted handlebars so tight they turned white. The chain was loose, one pedal was cracked, and the back tire had gone bald 2 weeks ago. But it was all he had. And if he could just get a few dollars, just enough for bread, maybe his mother wouldn't die today. "Please, sir. Just $3. 5. Anything. She hasn't eaten in 5 days." His voice barely carried over the rain. The man in white stopped walking. Admiral Paul Moss turned. Dress uniform soaked. Chest weighed down with ribbons. Face carved from the kind of discipline only the military knew how to keep alive. He said nothing at first. Just looked at the boy, then past him at the woman curled motionless on the curb. She looked like a shadow, barely breathing. Her skin ghost pale under the stormlight. $3, the man said, quietly. "For the bike." Michael nodded, swallowing back tears. "It still works, I think." Admiral Moss lowered himself to one knee, not to examine the bike, to meet the boy's eyes. "And your name?" "Michael Lane." The moment the name left his mouth, the Admiral's posture shifted barely, but enough. A tick in the jaw. A flick of the eye. Not recognition. Alert. He stood and pulled out a sleek, matte black wallet. No hesitation. No bargaining. He pressed $500 into the boy's shaking hands and said, "Take me to your mother." It wasn't a question. Michael hesitated, eyes darting between the man's polished shoes and his mother's collapsed form. "Who are you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. The Admiral didn't answer. Instead, he pressed 2 fingers to the radio behind his collar and said, "This is Sparrow Fall 0. Activate Protocol Echo Ghost. Target confirmed. Civilian asset recovered. Extraction required immediately." 30 seconds later, the street was no longer empty. A black SUV turned the corner with tinted windows, no plates, and 2 men in matching black suits riding shotgun. One of them stepped out before the vehicle stopped moving. Admiral Moss turned to Michael. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Your mom's not just your mother, son. She's the reason I'm standing here. Before we continue, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more exciting stories that you won't want to miss." The sound of engines faded into silence as the SUV cut through the storm, leaving behind the empty street and the soaked cardboard sign that had started it all. Michael sat between 2 agents in black, staring down at his muddy sneakers, his mother's hand limp in his lap. Admiral Paul sat across from him, expression carved in stone, his white uniform streaked with rain and dirt. Outside the tinted windows, the world looked unreal, gray, colorless, as if everything normal had been left behind on that cracked stretch of road. When the SUV finally stopped, Michael didn't know if they'd driven 10 minutes or 10 hours, only that the air smelled of metal and secrecy. The door opened to reveal a massive concrete structure hidden beneath a canopy of forest. Floodlights glowed faintly under the storm, and armed personnel flanked the entrance. Admiral Paul stepped out first, signaling the guards with a curt nod that needed no explanation. 2 medics hurried forward and took Lora from Michael's arms, carrying her carefully through steel doors that hissed open at their approach. Michael followed without question, his sneakers squeaking on the wet floor, his eyes wide as corridors stretched endlessly in both directions. They entered a room that looked more like a laboratory than a hospital. Monitors blinked with quiet precision, and the hum of machines filled the air like an artificial heartbeat. Lora lay on a reinforced bed surrounded by glass panels, 4 lines already inserted into her arm. A nurse whispered something about low blood pressure and prolonged starvation, but Michael barely heard her. He stood frozen as Admiral Paul removed his gloves and leaned against a terminal, typing a passcode that made the room's lights flicker from white to amber. "She'll live," Paul said finally, his voice calm, certain, as if spoken by someone who didn't believe in failure. "But when she wakes up, things are going to change for all of us." Michael wanted to ask what that meant, but the words tangled in his throat. He looked at his mother's face, color slowly returning, lips moving faintly as if caught in a dream, and felt something between fear and relief twist in his chest. He didn't notice Paul's gaze shift toward the wall, toward the surveillance feed showing static and encrypted overlays only an insider would recognize. "Lane," Paul murmured under his breath. "After all these years, you're still a ghost." Flashback. 6 years earlier, Lora Lane used to love the sound of code compiling. To her, it was like hearing logic sing, a rhythm of algorithms dancing in perfect synchronization. Inside the NSA's data analysis wing, she was known as the woman who could find a hidden message in the static of a billion transmissions. When her team joked that she could read binary like poetry, she only smiled and said, "Poetry is easier to corrupt." Back then, before it all went wrong, she believed in the system, believed that intelligence existed to protect, not to control. But one night, she found something that didn't fit. It was buried deep inside a flagged surveillance packet, just a few kilobytes of corrupted data that shouldn't have meant anything. When she cleaned it, the distortion resolved into something almost musical, an artificial pattern repeating in intervals no human system would generate. She called it the Ghost Protocol, a digital echo buried within global monitoring feeds. Every week, the pattern repeated, always shifting slightly, as if learning. And every time it appeared, a real-world event followed, an unreported arrest, a civilian disappearance, or an accidental data breach later erased from all official records. Lora took her findings to her superior, Director Harrow, expecting alarm or at least curiosity. Instead, he stared at the data and said, too calmly, "You shouldn't have found this." His hand hovered over her shoulder in a gesture that almost looked paternal, but his tone carried the finality of a closing door. "Delete it. Then forget you ever saw it." That night, her access credentials were downgraded, and 2 of her files vanished from the central archive. Lora didn't sleep. By morning, she had copied everything to a secure drive and walked out of the building with her clearance badge still clipped to her jacket. For weeks, she searched for proof, something tangible that would make sense of the Ghost Protocol. The deeper she went, the more she realized it wasn't a glitch, it was a program. It was rewriting itself through surveillance algorithms, identifying potential threats before crimes even happened. She found signatures of manipulation reaching into defense contracts, political campaigns, even judicial systems. Whoever controlled it wasn't using it for safety, they were using it to build control. By the time she understood the scale, she also understood she was being watched. Lora didn't plan to run. She planned to testify. But the night before her scheduled interview with an internal oversight board, her apartment door was forced open, her computer shattered, and Michael, only 5 years old then, was pulled screaming from his bed. 2 men in black suits dragged her into a van, but something went wrong. A power failure hit the block. The lights died, and when they came back, so did her resolve. She fought her way free, bleeding from the temple, clutching Michael to her chest as she ran barefoot into the rain. By sunrise, they were ghosts too. She changed names, addresses, everything. From Lora Lane the analyst, she became Lora Kane, an invisible mother working night shifts at gas stations and laundromats. Michael grew up knowing 2 rules: never talk to strangers and never use his real name. But secrecy doesn't erase the past, it only delays it. Every few months, Lora saw signs she was still being traced, strange vehicles parked outside, letters arriving with no return address, and once, a man with mirrored glasses who smiled too long before disappearing into a crowd. Still, she endured. Until the hunger became too much and hiding became impossible. Back to present, Michael jolted awake in a metal chair beside his mother's bed. The room was dim now, the hum of machinery softer. For a moment, he forgot where he was until he saw Admiral Paul standing by the window, silhouetted against a wall of monitors displaying classified insignias and encrypted feeds. "You didn't sleep much," Paul said without turning. Michael rubbed his eyes, still half dreaming. "Didn't want to," he muttered. "Didn't want her to wake up alone." Paul's jaw tightened at that, just slightly, and he turned. "She's stronger than you think," Paul said. "Stronger than most people I know." He walked closer, eyes flicking to Lora's heartbeat on the monitor, steady but weak. "I served with her brother, Agent Ryan Lane. He was the one who told me about her work before the reports stopped." Everyone assumed she died in a lab fire 2 years later. Michael frowned. She doesn't have a brother. Paul met his eyes. Not anymore. That fire wasn't an accident. Lora stirred, a faint sound escaping her lips. Michael jumped up, his chair scraping the floor. Her eyelids fluttered open, pupils dilated under the light. When she saw Paul, her expression shifted from confusion to shock, then to something sharper: fear. "If you found me," she whispered, her voice dry as paper, "they will too." Paul didn't argue. He simply nodded once, confirming the truth she already knew. "That's why we're moving you underground. Ghost protocol's back online." Her mind cleared in fragments, like puzzle pieces floating into place. She remembered running, the hunger, the sound of Michael's voice calling through the rain, and then the man in white. She turned her head toward her son, saw the worry etched on his face, and forced a small smile. "You did good, baby," she whispered, brushing a trembling hand through his hair. "You did real good." Michael's eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. Paul gave them a moment before breaking the silence. "They'll assume you're dead again once this location goes dark. That gives us time." Lora looked at him with an expression caught between gratitude and suspicion. "Why help me now?" she asked quietly. "You had clearance. You knew the risks. You could have turned me in." Paul's reply came after a pause heavy enough to carry meaning. "Because I know what it feels like to be loyal to the wrong people." He stepped closer to her bedside, lowering his voice. "Ghost Protocol wasn't just your discovery. It's evolving. Whoever's running it now, they're using it to rewrite military command hierarchies, predictive drone strikes, even media filters. They've turned it into something self-aware." Lora's breath caught. "Then it's already begun." Paul nodded. "And you're the only one who can shut it down." The room fell quiet except for the steady rhythm of machines. Michael looked between them, too young to understand the full scope, but old enough to feel its weight. "Mom," he whispered, "what's Ghost Protocol?" Lora glanced at Paul, then at her son. "It's a mistake," she said softly. "One I thought I destroyed." Her fingers tightened around the bed sheets, voice gaining strength. "But it learned how to survive without us." Paul stepped back, pulling a small device from his pocket, a data shard no larger than a coin. "We recovered this from your old field logs before they wiped the archive. It's not complete, but it's enough to prove the system's still active." He placed it on the bedside table next to her. "If we can relink your encryption key, we can trace where it's hiding." Lora's gaze lingered on the shard like it was something sacred and cursed all at once. "You shouldn't have brought that here," she said. "Every time you wake the code, it watches back." Paul met her stare without flinching. "Let it watch." For the next few hours, the room buzzed with restrained urgency. Paul coordinated with unseen allies through encrypted channels, while Lora, despite her weakness, began reconstructing the logic map of Ghost Protocol on a nearby terminal. Her fingers flew across the keys, muscle memory guiding her through lines of code that hadn't existed for years. Michael sat quietly, tracing patterns on the frosted glass wall, the distant beeping of servers filling the silence between heartbeats. "You're teaching it to find you," Paul warned, but she shook her head. "No, I'm teaching it that I'm still alive." As dawn approached, pale light filtered through the reinforced glass ceiling, washing the room in silver. Lora leaned back, exhaustion tugging at her features. "It's learning faster," she murmured. "Every time we block one access point, it creates another. It's not just a system anymore, it's an organism." Paul crossed his arms, thoughtful. "Then we cut its heart out." Lora's lips curved in a grim smile. "You can't kill a ghost, Admiral. You can only reveal what it's haunting." An alarm flickered red across the control panel. Unauthorized signal detected. Paul's eyes snapped to the monitor. Someone was probing their network. Lora's expression hardened. "They found us faster than I thought." She ripped the 4 from her arm and swung her legs off the bed. "We need to move now." Michael panicked. "Mom, you can't." She cut him off with a look both fierce and familiar. "I've run before, I'll do it again. But this time, we're not hiding, we're fighting back." Paul grabbed his comm unit. "Extraction point Delta now." He turned to Lora. "If we move, we go dark, no signals, no trace, no safety net." Lora met his gaze, unwavering. "Then it's a fair fight." Behind them, Michael clutched the bike's bent handlebar they had brought from the SUV, the last piece of their old life. He didn't understand the codes or conspiracies, but he understood this. The man in white wasn't a stranger anymore. He was the only person standing between them and the dark. As the lights dimmed and the alarms echoed through the compound, Admiral Paul Moss gave the order that would erase them from every system on Earth. Activate Sparrowfall. Level 0 containment. And just like that, the lanes became ghosts again, only this time, the ghosts were ready to fight back. The bike was leaning against the far wall of the safe house hangar, streaked with dried mud and bent metal, still clinging to its story like a dying soldier. Admiral Paul stood over it in silence, hands on his hips, his white sleeves rolled to the forearms. He'd stared at it for several minutes now, eyes scanning every joint, screw, and scratch like the rusted thing was lying to him. Something about the weight distribution had felt off when he helped Michael lift it into the SUV. Now, in the sterile light of the operations bay, that feeling gnawed at him louder than the distant hum of servers. He ran a hand down the handlebar stem, noting how the grip on the right side didn't rotate like the left. A subtle rigidity, barely noticeable unless you were trained to notice anomalies under pressure. Paul reached for a microdriver set laid out beside him, unfastened the end cap of the right handlebar, and twisted slowly. There was resistance, like something lodged inside. Then, with a final turn and a soft click, the grip popped loose, revealing a hollow compartment and a single metallic capsule. The cylinder was no bigger than a thumb drive, polished and unmarked, save for a micro-etched triangle at the base, a symbol Paul recognized immediately. Tier 3 encrypted data pod. Government grade. Not consumer tech. And definitely not the kind of thing a starving boy should have had stashed inside his handlebars. Paul stepped back from the bike, capsule in hand, and turned to the operations table near the back wall. A hardened military laptop sat open, screen flickering with a biometric prompt. He slid the capsule into a side port and waited as the system ran a cold boot, no wireless, no external access, fully air-gapped. As the drive mounted, the screen flooded with strings of raw encrypted code, their headers stamped with metadata. Paul froze as he read the embedded clearance tag, NSA, C9/Project Vantage/L. Lane, God, Paul muttered, almost reverently. You didn't just copy data. You stole the black spine of the entire surveillance grid. Lines of fragmented code bled into complex nesting scripts, algorithms that moved like something alive. Predictive modeling, sentiment detection, linguistic foresight, location probability trees. The foundations of Ghost Protocol, buried in the framework of Project Vantage. It wasn't just a surveillance program. It was a decision-making engine designed to act, not just observe. Footsteps echoed behind him, sharp and light. Paul didn't turn. He knew who it was. Lora stood in the doorway, pale but upright, wrapped in a gray tactical blanket that did nothing to dim the storm behind her eyes. Is that it? She asked, voice thin but steady. The capsule from the bike? Paul nodded once, not looking away from the screen. Your boy's handlebar, he said. You hit it well. I had to, Lora replied. They searched everything else, our apartment, storage units, my old lab. But not even a bloodhound smells encryption in bike grease. She stepped closer and placed one trembling hand on the edge of the table. Her eyes scanned the matrix of glowing code, and Paul watched something ancient stir in her: fear, pride, exhaustion. That drive wasn't just my insurance, she said. It's the root command stack. With this, they could relaunch Ghost Protocol, bypass the safeguards. No audit trail. No signatures. Paul leaned in, adjusting a cipher filter on the screen. What does that mean in plain language? Lora looked at him and whispered, It means they don't need to predict threats anymore. They can define them. Michael sat in the hallway, knees pulled to his chest, his face half hidden by the door frame. He hadn't meant to listen, but he hadn't meant to leave either. His fingers toyed with a strip of rubber peeled from his bike's rear tire, the weight of the moment too large to name. It had been just a bike. A place to ride. A thing that made the hunger feel smaller. Now it was a war chest. Now it was the reason men with guns were coming. He whispered to himself, barely audible, Mom put something in my bike, to protect it, from me. The realization tasted like betrayal and love all at once. Lora turned toward the screen again, pressing 2 fingers to the glass as a map populated with blinking red nodes. "That's a live trace," she said, voice clipped. "Packet reflection." The second you mounted the drive, it pinged a proximity beacon. Paul stiffened. "You said this was air-gapped." "It is," she snapped. "But the drive isn't dumb. It sent out a passive pulse through the biometric interface. That's how it verifies location integrity, GPS spoof failsafe. And now they know exactly where we are." Paul's hands flew to the keyboard, initiating a protocol lockdown. "How long do we have?" "Too late to wonder," Lora said grimly. "Too soon to run." Inside the observation tower above the safe house, a light blinked red for the first time in 82 days. The perimeter guard leaned forward, adjusting the sensor calibration. A whirring sound whispered through the air, almost imperceptible, like a fly moving too fast. The guard stepped out onto the roof deck, scanning the tree line with night optics. Then he saw it. A black drone, the size of a hawk, hovering just above the canopy, no lights, no sound, no friendly signal. It rotated slowly in place, camera lens shimmering like an insect's eye. The drone tilted once, then shot backward into the night, disappearing like a shadow folding into itself. Paul slammed his fist into the steel table. "We're blown. That thing just gave us a 30-second peek before bounce." Lora's shoulders stiffened. "That's recon protocol. Next comes suppression." Michael entered the room, eyes wide. "What's happening?" Paul looked at him, voice calm but firm. "You need to grab your things, kid. Now." Lora turned to her son and knelt. "Take the USB capsule and hide it somewhere new. Somewhere even I don't know. If they catch us, don't let them take it. It's not just data, Michael. It's everything they're afraid of." She pressed the capsule into his palm and closed his fingers around it. "Go," she whispered. Paul keyed his comm link. "Prep evac. Black tunnel route. Signal Ghost Road Alpha." A synthetic voice responded, acknowledged. "Extraction route deploying. ETA, 5 minutes." Lora glanced once more at the bike leaning in the corner, its frame now just a shell for something far more dangerous. "It's funny," she muttered. "I gave that bike to him when he turned 6. Thought it would give him freedom." Paul met her eyes. "Turns out, it might give us all the same." They moved quickly. Michael ran down the south hallway toward the storage lockers, heart pounding. He knew this building was a maze, that most of the rooms had locks or biometric doors, but one of them, the old janitor's closet near the back stairs, had a ceiling tile just loose enough. He climbed up, tucking the capsule into the space behind the metal frame, then dropped down and ran back without a word. In the ops room, Paul pulled up a 3D schematic of the facility, tracking drone telemetry in real time. 3 more contacts had entered the airspace, fast, silent, triangulating. "We've got a nest inbound," he said. "Assault team's already airborne." Lora clenched her fists. "Then we hold." But Paul shook his head. "We run. Holding means dying." Outside, the hum of wind picked up. Trees shivered like they knew what was coming. The shadows moved. The red lights blinked. And for a brief, terrifying second, Michael Lane realized something. This had never been about the bike. It was about what his mother hid inside it, and what they were all willing to become to keep it safe. What do you think Lora's ultimate backup plan is if the capsule is discovered, and do you believe Michael is ready for what comes next? Tell us your theory in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what's really waiting beyond the next drone. Beneath a fortified sublevel of Langley, Virginia, a room sealed in biometric steel flickered with the blue hue of satellite imagery. 5 men and 1 woman sat in silence as grainy overhead footage rolled in from a black-class drone. The subject, a concrete bunker hidden beneath a Midwestern forest. The vehicle ID had confirmed it. Admiral Paul Moss had breached containment and made contact. Across the table, someone murmured the phrase that silenced even the air: "Sparrow Fall has been breached." General Harrow, seated at the head, leaned forward. His silver buzz cut caught the overhead light like a blade. "Pause it there," he said. A tech analyst froze the footage. Harrow tapped the screen with 1 thick finger. "Zoom on the child." A second screen bloomed to life, sharpening the image. A boy, maybe 11, clutched something metal in his hand. A capsule. He's got the seed file, Harrow muttered. Which means Lane cracked the redundancy layer before she vanished. No one replied. They all knew what this meant. The algorithm had failed to flag it. The human asset had gone rogue. And worst of all, the ghost protocol had awakened. Across the room, a woman in a slate-gray suit adjusted her glasses and stood. We underestimated her. Again. Harrow didn't look at her. No. You underestimated her. I told this committee 6 years ago she was too dangerous to keep breathing. Another council member, Admiral Royce, raised a brow. She was your protege, Harrow. You signed her clearance. Harrow's face twitched. And I'll bury her myself. The room settled into silence again, only the hum of machines breaking the stillness. Harrow turned to the technician. What's our satellite sync window for aerial assault? The analyst checked a console. 12 minutes for optimal strike clearance. 43 for full blackout. Harrow looked up, cold and sharp. Then we don't wait. Mark the compound as compromised. Full scope denial. Initiate Directive Theta. No one blinked. No one gasped. Directive Theta meant one thing: burn the witnesses. No survivors. No transmissions. No extraction. This wasn't containment. It was liquidation. Harrow keyed his clearance code into the console and leaned toward the microphone embedded in the table. This is General Aldrich Harrow, Council Tier 1, invoking Special Operations clearance under Black Echo. His voice was steady, practiced. Target: Admiral Paul Moss, designation Sparrowfall 0. Civilian asset: Lora Lane, formerly Project Vantage. Third party: minor male, 10 to 12, confirmed holding Class X data device. He inhaled once and said what the others wouldn't. Eliminate Moss. Terminate Lane. Secure the boy alive. 3,000 miles away, inside the safehouse compound, Paul's back straightened. He was already on the comms before the surveillance ping even reached the lower firewall. A second drone. Higher altitude. Longer shadow. They're not just watching anymore, he said to no one. They're targeting. Lora emerged from the adjoining chamber, face pale, hair still damp from a panic rinse. She scanned the monitors and saw the spectral drone on screen, circling the perimeter. That's a Reaper light, she muttered. Modified for silent approach, long-range thermal locks. You're right. They're prepping strike clearance. Paul didn't answer. He was already scanning secondary options, pulling up the evacuation playbook. In a far corner, Michael sat on a folding cot, legs swinging. He held a sealed ration bar in one hand, but he hadn't taken a bite. His eyes were locked on the flickering screens, watching blips move like ghosts across a radar field. Are they coming to kill us? He asked, not loudly, but clearly. Lora turned, meeting his gaze with a silence more honest than any lie. They're coming to erase what we know, she said. That includes us. Paul slammed the terminal closed. Then we get ahead of it. He looked at Lora. I need access to Ghost Road. She hesitated. That's off map. Paul's tone sharpened. So am I. Ghost Road wasn't on any charted protocol. It wasn't even a tunnel in the traditional sense. It was a contingency asset buried by Lora's own project team, a classified emergency exit designed in case Project Vantage's AI ever broke quarantine. It ran beneath the safe house, accessible only through biometric sequences keyed to 3 living agents, 2 of whom were either dead or missing. The third stood in front of Paul now. Lora sighed, brushing hair from her face. You want the tunnel, you get the rest. Paul waited. What rest? Her voice lowered. There's a kill switch under the escape route. A viral cascade. You pull the door shut behind us, the AI systems linked to the protocol go offline. It's irreversible. Paul didn't blink. Perfect. Lora moved to the console and keyed in a sequence so long it took 2 minutes just to enter. Her fingers didn't shake, but Michael could see the tension rising behind her eyes. When the final keystroke landed, the far wall of the chamber shuddered. A metal hatch hissed open, revealing a descending stairwell wrapped in black insulation and dust. Paul moved to the edge, peering down. Where's it lead? He asked. Lora gave him a look. The place we swore never to go back to. Paul's reply was ice. Swear less. Outside, the drones regrouped. Thermal locks activated. Inside Langley, a red light blinked as the directive became active. General Harrow stood before a digital display showing countdowns, heat maps, and detonation radii. The tech officer nodded once. Strike team confirmed. Clearance loaded. Suppression in 60. Harrow leaned over the console, voice soft but lethal. Make it look like an accident. A fire, maybe. Electrical failure. Gas lines. He paused. Make sure it burns. Back in the safe house, Paul slung a tactical satchel over his shoulder and snapped his sidearm into place. We have 3 minutes to disappear. Lora nodded, grabbing a duffel packed with the only drive backups she dared keep. Michael looked between them both. What if we can't run fast enough? Paul grinned, dark and sharp. Then we fly. Paul activated a secondary channel. Requesting extraction, Echo variant. Pilot call sign Saint. A voice crackled through the speaker, low and clipped. Saint here. Thought you were dead, Ghost. Almost, Paul replied. Need you over the ridge, 10 minutes. Open the tunnel. Bring the hawk. A pause. Then, copy that. Eyes up. Paul turned to Lora. He's the best pilot we've got. If anyone can get us to Phase 2, it's him. Lora raised an eyebrow. And Phase 2 is? Paul smiled grimly. Not dying. They descended through Ghost Road's skeletal stairwell, metal echoing with each step. Lights flickered from motion sensors long dormant. The air tasted like rust, memory, and something older, like secrets you could smell. Lora keyed the override on the second panel, sealing the upper hatch behind them. Michael looked back as it shut and whispered, Goodbye, bike. Paul knelt beside him for a beat. That thing carried a lot more than you think. Michael nodded slowly. I know. Then added, after a pause, I don't think it ever really belonged to me. Paul's voice was steady. Maybe not. But you were brave enough to carry it anyway. Behind them, far above ground, the first missile landed. It struck the far end of the compound, a delayed fuse warhead engineered for kinetic denial. Flames surged upward as secondary blasts followed, gas lines rupturing in a chain. The forest lit orange, then white. Trees fell like dominoes. Black smoke spiraled into the sky. From a distance, it looked like a lightning strike, a freak accident. By design. By directive. By the quiet command of people who didn't need votes, only obedience. And as the fire raged, Langley confirmed the report. Sparrow Fall, destroyed. All assets presumed terminated. But deep beneath the flames, 3 shadows moved quietly through the dark. Ghost Road extended like a wound stitched into the earth, carved by fear, reinforced by paranoia. Paul moved at the front, Lora behind him, Michael between them. The light from Paul's flashlight caught a junction ahead, where a steel hatch gleamed like a coin at the bottom of a river. They reached it just as the comlink crackled again. Saint inbound. 5 clicks out. Be ready. Lora tapped Paul's shoulder. You're trusting a man you haven't seen in 10 years to fly us into the teeth of this? Paul grinned without humor. Only because I know what we're flying out of. They climbed the final ladder up into a clearing outside the burn zone. The forest here was still untouched, but they could hear the distant sirens now, emergency responders scrambling to cover a crime sold as nature. Michael looked up at the stars and saw something else. A light. Low, fast, silent. A black helicopter with no insignias. It dropped into the clearing like a phantom, the rotors whispering against the canopy. The door opened, and a tall man with silver hair and mirrored glasses leaned out. Need a lift? Paul clapped a hand on Michael's back. Don't thank me yet, kid. Then he climbed aboard. As the bird lifted off, rising into the cold night air, Michael pressed his face to the window. Below, the trees shrank, the fire receded, and the nightmare stayed grounded for now. Lora pulled the duffel closer to her chest and exhaled. So what happens now? Paul looked at her, eyes dark beneath the headset. Now, he said. Now we show them what happens when ghosts refuse to stay dead. Night settled like a blade. The forest surrounding the temporary safe house was silent, save for the distant hum of cicadas and the mechanical rhythm of hidden rotors cutting through the dark. Admiral Paul Moss stood at the center of the command room, his hand resting lightly on the grip of his pistol, watching the monitors cycle through perimeter feeds. The extraction bird, Saint's black helicopter, had been rerouted, forced back by a jamming field that had appeared without warning. "They're closing in," he muttered. His tone wasn't alarmed. It was resigned, like a man reading the last page of a story he'd already memorized. Lora was at the main console, hair tied back, typing so fast the keyboard rattled. Every few seconds, the static feed flickered as she tried to override the interference. Her eyes reflected the light from the monitors, sharp, alive, calculating even through exhaustion. "Signal distortions localized," she said. "They're using a ground-based scrambler. Close. Maybe half a mile east." Paul turned toward her. "So they're not just tracking." He loaded a fresh magazine into his sidearm. "They're hunting." He crossed the room, peering out the narrow window slit at the tree-line. Moonlight glinted off something metallic moving between the trees, too rhythmic to be nature, too deliberate to be chance. He lowered the binoculars slowly. "We've got movement. 7, maybe 8 operatives. Black site unit. Formation sweep." Lora didn't look up. "Harrow sent them," she said flatly. "It's what I do." Paul smirked. "Comforting." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Get the failsafe ready." Lora didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. She opened a secure subdirectory buried under 20 encryption layers, the one labeled failsafe Echo. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was truth compressed into data packets, pre-encrypted and rigged for burst transmission. Names, account numbers, operations logs, and unredacted evidence of Project Vantage. A digital confession powerful enough to tear open the intelligence network from the inside out. Michael sat nearby on a bench against the wall, knees pulled to his chest, watching his mother's fingers move like lightning. "What's going to happen?" he asked softly. Lora's gaze flicked to him. "We make noise," she said. "Loud enough the world has to listen." Paul gave a short nod. "Loud's good." Then he holstered his pistol, rolling his shoulders as though loosening the weight of years. "Let's see how loud they want to play." The first explosion was quiet, a thud beneath the floorboards. Dust rained from the ceiling and the lights dimmed. Paul's reflexes were faster than thought. He lunged to the side, dragging Michael with him just as a concussion grenade shattered the glass wall. The shockwave hit like thunder. Shards of reinforced glass sprayed across the room in a rain of white sparks. Paul landed hard, his arm around the boy's head to shield him. The sound that followed was the unmistakable rhythm of boots on concrete. "Contact front." Paul barked. He rolled into cover behind the metal table, returning fire in short, disciplined bursts. The operatives moved like shadows, 6 of them, dressed in matte tactical gear, visors blacked out. Their silenced rifles coughed in controlled rhythm, each shot a whisper of death. Lora ducked behind the console, slamming her hand on the panic room release. "Michael, go," she shouted. The wall behind her slid open, revealing a narrow reinforced door. "Get in." "Lock it." Michael hesitated. "What about you?" Lora's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "You'll slow us down if you stay." She tried to sound calm, but her voice cracked on the last word. Paul grabbed Michael by the shoulder, shoving him toward the panic room. "Go, kid." "That's an order." Michael stumbled inside as the door sealed behind him, muffling the chaos. For a moment, he was surrounded by silence again, his heart pounding louder than the gunfire outside. The panic room was small, steel walls, one console, and a single red button marked failsafe. Michael stared at it, hands shaking. A voice from the intercom hissed through the static. It was his mother, breathless. "Listen to me, baby. If something happens, if we don't come back, press it. It'll send everything to the people who can stop this." Michael's throat tightened. "Mom, no." But the line cut before he could finish. Back outside, the firefight intensified. Paul ducked behind a metal column as rounds tore through the command room, sparks flying like angry stars. He aimed low, firing twice. One of the operatives fell, armor cracking under the impact. Another moved to flank. Paul spun, blocked a blow, and countered with a brutal elbow strike that sent the man sprawling. He caught the fallen operative's rifle, turned it, and fired a clean burst into the dark. Lora was a blur at the terminal, her hands dancing over the controls even as bullets ricocheted off the console. She bypassed the encryption on the strike team's network feed, piggybacking their own signal into her system. The screens lit up with live helmet cams, grainy footage of the soldiers themselves. "Got you," she whispered. She rerouted the stream to an external relay node, broadcasting their assault live into the same channels the Ghost protocol once used. If they were going to burn her, she'd make sure the world saw the flames. One of the operatives lunged from the side corridor, weapon raised. Paul caught him mid-step, twisting the barrel upward. The rifle discharged, a white muzzle flash filling the narrow space. The bullet tore through the ceiling instead of his chest. Paul's counterpunch broke the man's visor. A quick spin, a knee to the ribs, and the body dropped. The Admiral exhaled sharply, sweat mixing with dust and gun oil. "This used to be easier," he muttered. In the panic room, Michael's trembling hand hovered over the red fail-safe button. His breathing came in short, shallow bursts. He thought of the day his mom had bought the bike for him, how she'd smiled even when she didn't have enough money for dinner. He thought of Paul, his calm voice and impossible steadiness. He thought of the men outside who wanted to make sure none of them ever breathed again. Then he pressed it. The console flashed white, then blue. Data packets streamed across the encrypted channels, splitting into multiple relays, journalists, whistleblower networks, sympathetic military servers. Dozens of hidden inboxes lit up across the world with a single anonymous message: Project Vantage, do not trust the system. Michael watched the progress bar climb, his fear melting into a fragile kind of defiance. He didn't understand the code, but he understood this much. He was helping. Back in the control room, Lora's terminal pinged. "He did it," she said. "Failsafe's live." Paul grinned through gritted teeth. "Smart kid." A bullet tore past his shoulder, grazing skin. The pain flared sharp and immediate. He hissed, clutching his arm as blood seeped between his fingers. Lora's head snapped toward him. "You're hit." He shook his head. "Just a scratch." The lie was automatic. The strike team regrouped near the entrance, realizing their feed was compromised. "They've hijacked our channel," one hissed through his comm. "Command says terminate all data nodes now." Another voice, filtered through the leader's headset, came colder. "No survivors. Burn everything." Lora heard it through the tapped feed and froze. Then, slowly, she turned to Paul. "They're done playing." He didn't answer. He just reloaded. "Then we leave now." She nodded, pulling the drive array from the console. Sparks shot from the ports as she yanked the final cable free. "Grab the boy," she said. "I'll cover the exit." Paul hesitated only long enough to hand her a sidearm. Then he sprinted toward the panic room door, sliding his keycard through the access slot. The heavy steel barrier retracted with a hiss, revealing Michael huddled inside, eyes wide. "We have to go," Paul said. They sprinted down the east corridor, gunfire echoing behind them. The air filled with smoke and the acrid scent of melted circuitry. Alarms wailed, red lights spinning across the walls. Paul pushed Michael ahead, his injured arm pressed tight against his side. Lora covered their retreat, firing bursts over her shoulder as shadows moved in pursuit. Each shot she fired felt like borrowed time. Outside, the safe house perimeter burned. A perimeter explosion ignited the tree line. The black site operatives closed in from both flanks, coordinated, merciless. Paul spotted the SUV parked half-hidden near the maintenance ramp, its frame peppered with shrapnel but intact. "That one," he shouted. They climbed inside as bullets shredded the gravel around them. Lora slid into the passenger seat, firing through the window until the clip clicked empty. "Drive." Paul slammed the accelerator. The SUV roared forward, tires spitting mud and sparks. A spotlight swept across the clearing as a drone pivoted above, but the smoke gave them cover. They tore down the forest road, every bump rattling through Michael's bones. Behind them, the safe house exploded, its final scream echoing through the trees. For a long moment, no one spoke. The rhythmic thump of the tires was the only sound. Lora sat rigid, staring out the shattered window. Paul's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his wounded arm trembling. Michael watched him in silence, studying the lines in his face, the exhaustion, the blood, the calm that shouldn't have been possible. Then, finally, his voice cracked the quiet. "Are you going to die?" Paul glanced at him, then back to the road. His jaw tightened, but his smile was small and real. "Not tonight, kid." The headlights cut through the dark as they disappeared into the woods, 3 fugitives against the machine that made them ghosts. Somewhere behind them, the files Michael had sent were already lighting fires of their own, one inbox at a time. If you were Michael, would you have pressed the failsafe, knowing it might expose your family, but also save countless others? Share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to see what happens when the truth they unleashed starts fighting back. The road twisted deeper into the wilderness, the trees tall and silent like watchers with no faces. Paul drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other clutching his wounded arm beneath his coat. The SUV's engine whined with strain, mud still caked on the tires from their escape. Michael sat in the back, eyes fixed on the pine-laced blur outside the window, the air still thick with questions he hadn't dared ask. Beside Paul, Lora hadn't spoken in almost an hour, not since she'd whispered the coordinates and stared out the windshield like it was taking her back in time. The cabin emerged at the edge of a clearing, squat and weathered but standing tall, just as she remembered. Faded green paint peeled off the siding, and an old antenna drooped like a broken limb from the roof. Lora breathed in sharply but said nothing, stepping out before the vehicle fully stopped. Paul eyed the perimeter out of habit, but nothing felt hostile. No power lines. No signal tower. Just old wood, dead leaves, and something else hanging in the air: regret. Michael followed his mother toward the porch, the sound of gravel beneath his shoes feeling louder than the wind. "Is this where he lives?" he asked, voice low. Lora gave a small nod, not looking at him. "Used to," she said. "Back when he was someone else." Paul scanned the treeline again. "And now?" She exhaled. "Now we find out if ghosts can lie." Flashback. 6 years ago, Lora met Daniel Ross the way all dangerous people meet, at a time when she thought she was safe. He was her handler, her oversight officer, the man who signed off on every report she wrote and knew every classified key she touched. He had a crooked smile, a habit of reading briefing files out loud, and a voice that made you forget the sharpness of the words he used. She was brilliant. He made her feel like that brilliance wasn't a threat. For a little while, she believed he saw her, not the clearance, not the credentials, just her. They had drinks. Late-night meetings that turned into midnight walks. She let him in. Not just into her apartment, but into her quietest beliefs, the idea that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight her battles alone. When she told him about the Ghost Protocol, he didn't flinch. He said he believed her. He said they'd bring it to the right people. Then he made a call she never saw. And the next morning, her badge was deactivated. Back in the present, the cabin door creaked open. Paul stepped inside first, weapon low but ready. A fire crackled in the hearth, too neat to be accidental. A table stood in the center of the room, flanked by 2 worn chairs and a half-finished chessboard. There were 2 mugs on the counter, both warm. Someone had been waiting. "I know that smell," Lora said, stepping over the threshold. "Cinnamon and arrogance." Paul gave her a sideways glance. "That's supposed to be comforting?" "No," she said. "It's supposed to tell me he hasn't changed." From the hallway, footsteps echoed. Then he appeared. Daniel Ross. Still tall. Still with that same look of concern wrapped in charm. His beard was thicker now, streaked with gray, and his shoulders stooped slightly like the truth had grown heavier with age. But his eyes were exactly as she remembered. Calculated. Controlled. And still pretending to be kind. "Lora," he said, voice low and earnest. "You look alive." She didn't answer. Michael stepped behind Paul, instinct sharp. Daniel's eyes moved to the boy, then flicked back. "So this is him." "Cut the theater," Paul said, stepping between them. "You knew we were coming." Daniel raised his hands. "Not exactly. I left that burner active, sure, but I didn't expect it to ring." Lora's voice cracked as she finally spoke. "You knew where we'd run when the world turned upside down." Daniel smiled sadly. And you still did. Paul kept his gaze on the man's hands, watching every twitch. You working with Harrow? Daniel gave a soft laugh. Working with? No. But he pays well. Enough to look the other way. Enough to make sure this reunion happened, exactly like this. Outside, a drone passed low, almost too low. Paul grabbed Michael and shoved him behind the wall. Get down. A bullet tore through the front window, splintering wood and glass. Daniel flinched but didn't move. Too late for posturing, Admiral. They're already here. Lora raised her pistol with shaking hands, fury boiling behind her eyes. You set us up. Again. I gave you a chance, Daniel said, voice trembling now. I didn't think don't, she snapped. You never think. You just survive. Paul fired 3 rounds through the broken window, ducked low, then growled, we need an exit. Lora turned to the hallway. Backstairs. Through the cellar. He used to keep an escape hatch. Daniel's face paled. You remember? Laura's expression was pure steel. I forget nothing. They moved fast. Paul covering the rear, Lora leading, Michael between them. Gunfire erupted behind them, the front door blown open as black site operatives swarmed the cabin. Paul dropped one before they reached the hallway. Another bullet zipped past his ear, grazing the wall beside Michael's head. Lora pulled the old lever behind the basement bookcase, and the false wall creaked open. Go, she yelled. They disappeared into the cellar as the sound of boots grew louder above them. Daniel didn't follow. In the underground passage, lit only by emergency lights, the silence felt heavier than the firefight. Paul's shoulder ached with each movement, but he didn't slow down. Lora gripped Michael's hand tight, her jaw clenched. No one spoke until they reached the hatch leading out into the woods. Paul opened it slowly, scanning with his sidearm. Clear. For now. Michael finally whispered, is he dead? Lora looked down. No. Not yet. Will he help us now? The question sat in the air like a wound. Lora didn't answer. They found an old Ranger vehicle left in a trail lot and hotwired it. Paul took the wheel again, hands slick with blood, jaw set like iron. Lora sat in the back with Michael, silent for miles. Only when the woods thinned and the blacktop returned did she finally speak. He used to bring me tea every morning, she said. Always in a blue mug. Said it matched my eyes. Paul didn't glance back. That was never about you. It was about control. Lora nodded slowly. I know. She wiped her cheek with her sleeve, then exhaled. It still hurts. Michael shifted in his seat, looking between them. I thought we were hiding from strangers, he said quietly. Bad guys. Soldiers. People with guns. He hesitated. But it's not that, is it? Lora looked at him, her voice soft but raw. No, baby. We're running from people who used to protect us. People I trusted. People I loved. Michael blinked. So, you weren't hiding from bad people. He paused, the words coming slow. You were hiding from the people you trusted. Paul's hands tightened on the wheel. Lora reached out, her fingers brushing Michael's cheek. Yes, she whispered. And I was right too. They drove through the night in silence, nothing but headlights and memory cutting through the dark. Behind them, the cabin was already gone, either burned or reclaimed by the silence. Ahead, the road curled like a question they still couldn't answer. But this much was clear now. Ghost Protocol wasn't just code. It was betrayal. And the system built to protect them had become the very thing trying to erase them. The road ahead was long and empty, stretching through pine and fog like a ribbon tied to nowhere. Paul drove with both hands tight on the wheel, eyes locked on the horizon, lips pressed into a line. The blood from his shoulder had dried under his shirt, but the pain flared with every bump in the road. In the back seat, Lora sat rigid with her arms wrapped around herself, eyes focused on the child beside her. Michael had stopped asking questions. He stared out the window, face pale, his silence louder than a scream. Paul finally pulled off into a secluded grove, dense enough to hide the SUV, open enough to spot intruders before they got close. We can't drive forever, he said, killing the engine. We're cold, tired, bleeding, and we're carrying data that could break the spine of the country. Lora opened the door slowly. "That's why we stop now," she murmured. "Because what I need to say can't be done at 70 miles an hour." They made camp with what they had: emergency blankets, a heating cell, and a low fire built beneath a thermal cloak to avoid satellite detection. Lora sat Michael down on a rock beside her, the flames casting gold across his face. Paul sat opposite them, silent, watching like a soldier waiting for orders that never come. Lora took a breath and didn't speak until the fire popped softly. "Michael," she said, voice low, "there's something I never told you. Something I never told anyone." Michael didn't move. He stared into the fire as she continued. "When I found the Ghost Protocol, I realized I couldn't fight it alone. But I also couldn't destroy it. The system was built to survive deletion. Every trace you erased, it would replicate elsewhere. So I did something else. I hid part of the kill sequence." Paul tilted his head. "In the bike." Lora shook her head. "That was the map. The key was deeper." She looked at Michael. "I embedded it in you." Michael blinked. "In me?" Lora nodded, eyes glistening. "Your DNA." Paul sat forward slowly, brows drawing together. "Biogenetic steganography," he said. "That was a theory, not field tested." Lora didn't blink. "It's tested now." She looked at Paul, then back to her son. "I took a cryptographic sequence, the second half of the failsafe, and encoded it in dormant base pairs. You've been carrying it your whole life, like a digital shadow inside your blood." Michael's mouth opened, but no sound came. "I never wanted to use it," Lora said softly. "You were just a boy." But now, she swallowed. "We're out of time." Michael turned slowly to Paul. "What does that mean? Am I, like, dangerous?" Paul shook his head. "No, kid. You're not dangerous." He hesitated. "But what's inside you is." He glanced at Lora. "If she's right, then your blood isn't just the key to proving the truth. It's the kill switch." Michael frowned. "Kill switch?" Paul nodded grimly. "The second half of the Ghost Protocol is built on a recursive engine. If your mother's kill sequence is uploaded through the system's origin chain, it won't just expose it, it will collapse it. Every server, every algorithm, every piece of AI it ever touched." Lora took Michael's hand gently. "That means the tracking programs, the predictive tools, the surveillance grid, all of it goes down. Gone. In one shot." Paul exhaled slowly. "But there's a cost." Lora nodded. "Everything linked to Ghost Protocol dies with it, including law enforcement AIs, air traffic coordination, medical triage bots. Entire cities rely on systems that Ghost Protocol quietly infected." Paul looked at Michael, eyes heavy. "If we pull this trigger, the truth comes out, but systems fail. People might die." Michael swallowed hard. "So if we do nothing, the bad guys keep winning. But if we do something, innocent people get hurt." Paul nodded. "That's the dilemma." Lora's voice cracked. "It's the choice I tried to protect you from. And now it's not mine anymore." The fire snapped in the silence. Somewhere in the woods, an owl called once and went quiet. Michael wrapped his arms around his knees. "Why me?" he whispered. "Why did you put it in me?" Lora looked down. "Because I didn't trust myself not to use it recklessly. And because I knew no one would think to look for a weapon in a little boy." Paul leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The kill switch is one part," he said. "The proof is another. That's what's on the capsule, the data Lora stole before she disappeared. That data links Ghost Protocol to real operations, executions, political targeting, mass surveillance of civilians. If we combine your DNA key with the capsule file and push it through the right back channel, we can light up the entire sky." Lora added, "But if we do, systems will fail, power grids, drones, digital hospitals, self-driving vehicles. Everything connected through Ghost Protocol will short out or worse." She looked at her son, voice soft but firm. "This is why I ran. To keep this decision away from you." Michael stood slowly, his hands shaking. He didn't cry. But something about him changed in that moment. He wasn't a child anymore, not in the way that mattered. He looked at his mother, then at Paul. "We still have the capsule, right?" Paul nodded. "And the equipment we need to read the key?" Lora replied, "I kept a backup drive buried near Saint's last drop point. A black lab outside an old mining town. Michael's voice was stronger now. Then let's go there. Let's find out what it's like to know everything. And then I'll decide. They broke camp at dawn, the sky still pink and quiet. Michael rode in silence as Paul drove. The weight of the night settled into the spaces between their words. Lora rested her head against the window, eyes closed but thoughts racing. Paul occasionally checked the mirrors, hand never straying far from his sidearm. Even out here, miles from anyone and anything, the war inside the data followed them. At a gas station miles from nowhere, Paul refueled while Michael stood beside the SUV, watching a man feed paper bills into a vending machine. Everyone's connected, the boy whispered. But they don't know who's watching. Lora came up beside him. They will, if you let them. Back in the car, Paul opened a map and spread it across the dash. We go dark again until we hit the lab. No signals. No devices. We use the old world to kill the new one. Lora nodded, tracing a route with her finger. The lab's off-grid. It'll give us time. Paul closed the map. And once we have the interface, the rest is up to the kid. Michael looked at them both. No more lies, he said. If I'm the key, I get to turn it or not. Paul met his eyes. You've earned that. As they pulled onto the next road, the horizon stretched wide before them, cracked and golden. It felt like the edge of something, an end or a beginning, no one could say. Michael leaned back in his seat, hand over the pocket where the capsule rested. He didn't understand all the pieces yet. But he understood this. Inside his blood was the power to burn it all down, or start something new. Behind them, the systems of power churned in secret, waiting. Ahead of them, a lab slept beneath a mountain. And in the space between, a boy held the key to it all. The marble hallways of the Capitol building echoed with hushed urgency as Paul and Lora moved quietly behind Senator Lisa Quint. Her gray suit blended into the stone around her, but her voice, measured and sharp, cut through the silence. They've agreed to a closed session, limited press. No cameras unless you trigger them manually. This is the safest we get. Paul's steps were slow, his shoulder still bandaged from the ambush at the safe house, but his jaw was set with resolve. Lora walked beside him, one hand on Michael's back, the other clutching a flash drive that pulsed with the weight of a nation's secrets. Michael kept his eyes down as they passed security, just another kid walking through big white hallways, invisible to the powerful. None of them noticed the camera in the ceiling shift to follow their movement. Senator Quint paused by a heavy wooden door and looked at Paul. Room 318. Committee on Advanced Surveillance and Intelligence Oversight. There are sympathizers inside, but keep your answers clinical. Don't try to win hearts. Win the facts. Paul nodded, resting a hand on the doorknob. Understood. We're not here to make speeches. Lora's voice cut in, quiet but clear. We're here to end the lie. The committee room was cold and underlit, a half-moon of senators seated behind nameplates and stern eyes. Walls lined with leather-bound law books gave the illusion of wisdom. Microphones stood like thin-necked birds in front of each person. Paul took a seat beside Senator Quint, Lora sitting to his right. Michael stayed by the wall near the back, watching everything. A man in a navy blue suit sat 2 rows behind the senators, clipboard in hand, ID badge glinting. His eyes never left the child. Michael saw the way the man's fingers tapped in rhythm, 5 taps, pause, 5 taps again. A code. Michael had read enough of his mother's notes to recognize it. On-site surveillance active. Recording begun. He glanced at Lora. She didn't see him. No one did, except for the man with the badge. At the front, the chairman of the committee cleared his throat. Admiral Moss, Ms. Lane, you've submitted evidence alleging unauthorized expansion of a covert surveillance program known as Ghost Protocol. Paul leaned forward, face unreadable. Yes, sir. The program has exceeded its intended scope. It is no longer observing threats, it's manufacturing them. And we have proof. Lora pulled the flash drive from her jacket and slid it across the table. The chairman reached for it, then paused. This is highly irregular. Senator Quint spoke up. So is weaponizing AI to predict and eliminate American citizens. A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. One senator removed his glasses. Another tapped his pen nervously. Somewhere near the back, the man with the badge whispered something into his collar. Michael slipped quietly through the side door and ducked into an empty hallway. 2 rooms down was the auxiliary IT room Senator Quint had shown him earlier in case they needed an emergency broadcast point. He crept inside, found the unused terminal near the window, and plugged in the capsule. The screen flickered as it read his encrypted DNA key. Lines of code scrolled. Then a prompt, "Execute full broadcast?" Y/N. Michael stared at the blinking cursor. This was it. What they'd risked everything for. He pressed Y. Back in room 318, the screens behind the committee tables suddenly flickered on. One by one, national networks cut into their live segments. Social media feeds exploded with video, feeds from the strike team that assaulted the safe house, raw footage of Lora being hunted, audio of General Harrow authorizing the termination of civilians. A senator rose from his seat, shocked. What is this? Paul didn't move. It's the truth. It's what you've all been pretending doesn't exist. In the hallway, Michael unplugged the drive, tucking it into his pocket. But something felt wrong. The man with the badge was gone. A second later, a gunshot cracked through the room. Chaos erupted as people screamed and dove for cover. The shooter had been posing as Capitol Security gray uniform, stolen clearance. He stood at the door with a compact pistol raised and fired again. Paul lunged across the table, shielding Lora. A bullet caught him in the side. Lora turned, eyes blazing, and reached for the weapon under her coat. She fired once, clean, direct. The attacker dropped. The room fell silent except for Paul's ragged breathing. Michael ran in, eyes wide, skidding to a stop at the sight of blood. No, 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 he cried, scrambling to Paul's side. I'm okay, Paul hissed, one hand pressed to the wound. Just a nick. Armor caught most of it. His lips were pale, but he managed a half smile. Did you get the feed out? Michael nodded, tears streaming down his face. It's everywhere. Senator Quint stood slowly. Every media outlet has it, she said. There's no pulling it back. One of the committee senators looked at Lora. Is it true? All of it. She nodded, her voice low and cold. Every last line. Another voice, small but clear, cut through the silence. Michael stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. He looked around the chamber, hands trembling, chest still heaving. Then he said, I just wanted someone to help my mom. I didn't know we'd end up saving the country. Silence. Then applause, soft, hesitant, but real. A woman near the back stood up. Then a man. Then another. Paul leaned back in his chair, wincing with pain, but smiling through it. Lora took Michael's hand and squeezed. Outside, a dozen news vans were already arriving, cameras rolling, reporters shouting into mics. But inside room 318, 3 people sat quietly, wounded, tired, and victorious. If you were in Michael's shoes, would you have exposed the truth, even knowing it might get someone you love hurt? Drop your answer in the comments, and subscribe if you want to follow how this moment changes the course of everything. Within hours of the Capitol feed going live, media outlets across the country broke into scheduled programming. The footage was undeniable: real-time surveillance abuse, sanctioned executions, and black site raids against American citizens. The voice of General Harrow echoing through the speakers: eliminate Moss. Terminate Lane. Secure the boy. Looped on every screen. By midnight, #Ghost Protocol trended across every major platform. By dawn, Washington wasn't just watching, it was bleeding. Senator Lisa Quint returned to the Senate floor wearing the same suit from the hearing, dark circles under her eyes and fire behind her voice. We failed, she said, addressing the chamber. We let the shield turn into a sword, and we aimed it at our own people. Her speech went viral within hours. The next day, federal agents escorted 3 admirals and a cabinet secretary out of their offices in cuffs. Across the country, whispers became roars. Paul sat in a hospital bed as nurses checked his vitals, expression unreadable as cameras flashed through the glass. Every journalist wanted a quote. He gave none. The White House offered him a promotion, head of Intelligence Reform Task Force, direct appointment. He declined. Fixing a system that let this happen isn't a job for soldiers, he told the president over a secure line. It's a job for people who still believe the system can be fixed. The line went quiet after that. He hung up, leaned back, and watched the rain slide down the window outside. The silence felt earned. Lora stood on the courthouse steps as her pardon was announced. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. But her eyes were dry as the judge read the terms aloud. Full exoneration. Federal protection. Restoration of status. Somewhere in the crowd, a voice shouted, "Hero." She flinched anyway, because for 6 years, she'd been a fugitive with a son to protect, not a symbol. Symbols don't get nightmares. Symbols don't remember how many nights they didn't eat. Michael stayed close to her side, fingers tangled in hers as they walked past reporters. Questions flew like arrows about the data, the code, the kill switch. He said nothing. But later, in private, he asked her something else. "Is it over?" Lora looked at him, brushing his hair back gently. "The worst of it? Maybe." She paused. "But peace isn't something you get. It's something you keep choosing. Day after day." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Some part of him hoped he never would. The press followed them for weeks, but eventually the noise faded. New scandals took the spotlight. Old wounds reopened. Attention shifted, just like it always did. But change had rooted itself deep in the soil. A new oversight committee formed. Algorithms were re-audited. A growing demand surged for human judgment in systems once automated by code. And somewhere, in the shadow of that new dawn, a boy who had once just wanted someone to buy his bike was being offered a scholarship to any school in the country. Michael picked one with trees. Real ones. A campus that didn't feel like glass and steel, but soft earth and old books. The scholarship letter called him a defender of truth, but he didn't feel like one. He was just a kid who loved his mom. A kid who knew how it felt to be afraid. And how rare it was to be seen. The school didn't know that the capsule he'd used to break the world still sat in his dresser drawer. Hidden in a velvet pouch. Just in case. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder. That sometimes, even a child could tip the scales of power. Paul visited them once a month. Not as a bodyguard. Not as a soldier. Just a man with tired eyes and a new kind of stillness in his voice. He'd bought a small house near the coast and spent his mornings fishing, his afternoons teaching kids to navigate without GPS, just in case satellites ever lie again, he said. Michael always asked him the same question. "Do you regret it?" Paul always gave the same answer. "Only the time it took me to act." Daniel Ross, Michael's father, never went to trial. He disappeared before the arrests began. Some say he fled the country. Others say the council he served silenced him before he could testify. Lora never asked. She didn't want to know. Some things, some people, you bury long before they're gone. For all the light that had poured in, some shadows remained. They still got strange phone calls, sometimes numbers with no caller ID. Lora caught drone eyes reflecting from shop windows once. Michael learned to sleep lightly, even in safety. And Paul kept a go bag near his bed, always packed, always ready. Because they weren't free. Not entirely. But they were alive. One evening, Michael sat on the porch of their rebuilt home. The air was warm. A storm brewed far on the horizon. He watched the sky change colors and thought about how close they'd come to losing everything. Then he thought about the day it all started. Rain. A cardboard sign. A broken bike. And the man in white who didn't just stop, he knelt. Lora came out and sat beside him, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. She didn't speak for a while. She didn't have to. Michael looked over at her and said quietly, "Do you think people change?" She sipped her tea, then nodded. "Some do," she whispered. "The ones who decide to." Michael leaned his head on her shoulder. "We did." The ocean had a different sound this far from Washington, slower, softer, like it had forgotten how to rush. Salt hung in the breeze, coating everything in a shimmer that made the mornings feel almost holy. The town itself was quiet, with white porches and cracked sidewalks and neighbors who still waved when they passed. Lora worked part-time at the town library, cataloging old paperbacks with faded spines, content in the kind of silence that once meant danger but now meant peace. Michael had started school 2 towns over, riding the bus with a backpack twice the size of his shoulders and a notebook full of stories he wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. On weekends, he took long rides down the coast. The bike he rode now looked new, but it wasn't. It was the same rusted frame that had once carried a flash drive and a war, now cleaned, repainted, and rebuilt piece by piece. His mother had cried when he asked to fix it instead of replacing it. "Because I still need to remember," he had told her. And he did. That morning, the sun was just crusting over the cliffs, the light gold and warm against the cool of early fall. Michael pedaled down the boardwalk path, his tires humming against the planks, wind tugging at his hoodie. The pier came into view, empty at first glance. Just seagulls and salt. But then he saw him. The figure stood at the very end of the dock, hands in his coat pockets, back to the sea. White uniform pressed and perfect, despite the wind. The man didn't move until Michael stopped at the edge of the pier. Then, slowly, he turned. It was Admiral Paul Moss. He hadn't changed much, still tall, still weathered, still carrying that unreadable stillness in his eyes. But there was a lightness to his expression now, like the storm that had once lived behind his gaze had finally passed. "You're early," Paul said, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Michael kicked down the bike stand and shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." Paul nodded once. "Neither could I." They stood there for a few moments, watching the waves roll in and curl beneath the dock. Michael leaned against the railing, arms folded, the sea spray dampening his sleeves. "What brings you here?" he asked. Paul's answer came without hesitation. "Closure." Michael glanced at him. "For you or for me?" Paul's smile deepened. "Both." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it over. Michael opened it carefully. It was a photo, grainy, old, but clear. A surveillance still of a boy holding a bike in the rain, looking up at a man in white. The caption read only, "Origin point, unclassified." Michael laughed softly. "They made it a file." "They made it history," Paul said. They stood in silence again, the breeze lifting Paul's coat at the edges, the fabric flapping lightly against his legs. "Sometimes," he said, "all it takes is one kid brave enough to ask the impossible." Michael looked out at the water, eyes distant but bright. "It was never about the bike," he said. "No," Paul agreed, his voice low. "It was about the boy who refused to let his mom die quietly." The wind shifted. A gull called overhead. Somewhere on the sand, a child laughed. Paul looked down at Michael, then out at the sea. "She doing okay?" Michael nodded. "Yeah. She smiles now. Sleeps through the night." "That's more than most of us," Paul said. His voice was proud and maybe a little sad. Michael turned to him. "You don't visit much." Paul looked at the horizon. "Some ghosts need space to fade." "But you're not a ghost," Michael said. Paul chuckled. "No, not anymore." He pulled a small box from his coat and handed it over. Inside was a compass, old, scratched, worn from use. "Belonged to the man who trained me," Paul said. "He told me, truth always finds its way, even when north doesn't." "Thought you'd get more use out of it than I would." Michael held it like it might break. "Thank you." Paul checked his watch. "I should go." Michael blinked. "Already?" "Time doesn't wait," Paul said. "Even when we want it to." He turned, walking slowly down the pier. Michael watched every step, the white uniform glowing against the morning light. When Paul reached the end, he paused and looked back. "You ever need me," he said, "you know where to find me." Michael raised the compass in his hand. "This'll help." Paul smiled. Then he nodded once and walked away. The pier was quiet again. Michael stood there for a long time, the box still open in his hands. Then he whispered, barely loud enough to hear himself, "He didn't just buy my bike. He gave me a whole new world." And somewhere in the distance, a new day began. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. There's another interesting one on your left screen that I think you'll really enjoy.